Hey, good morning, everybody, again, and welcome for joining us. This is session 3. Did session 1 2 weeks ago with William and David on general effect. Today, we're going to focus more on field visual and field visual ensemble. So, again, we would like to welcome Mr. William Chumley from the Denver, Colorado area. He's going to help educate us a little bit more today. William, you may take it away.
Great. Good to see everyone. And I'm going to get my screen going and let you watch a couple slides go for a moment here at the beginning, and then we'll talk more. My focus today is really about it'll be kind of a combination view of designing and judging, and really building on the talk that we had last week or 2 weeks ago about the totality of your show. Let me get this going for you. And really the theme today, we're going to focus on the ensemble, the visual sheet, and the design process for the show, and then talk a bit about the field visual approach, both from a design and judge perspective. The key to this that I want everyone to take into consideration is our talk a couple of weeks ago was really about having a totality, having a uniqueness, having a concept. And to me, all the sheets build into supporting that part of the system. And I listened to the end of David's talk earlier, and I think the focus on achievement is really important. Supporting the music and how the visual supports the music is a key. And I think it's really important to think of the design of your show as the bridge between what you teach the students and how you get it to come together into your total. This slide starts that a little bit, that you might think of you're doing foundational teaching and building skills into the performers, which include music and marching. So this is a marching music environment. And then ensemble speaks to how you put that together and connect the field skills to the ensemble skills, which then will generate effect. So as you look at that, I wanted you to consider the totality of how each of these elements builds together, and that will be the way that I'm approaching the concept today, and that you need to be looking at each of them. And if you think about the scoring system, I don't think if you win field, you're going to win the whole show. I don't think if you win ensemble, you're going to win the whole show. And I think you have to think about how you get into the right neighborhood, and that those captions can affect you within a neighborhood, but they won't necessarily change your neighborhood. And so I think it's important for you to think about that as you design, and then for judges to remember your part and your component, and can you see how those choices fit into the totality. And you can let me know if there's specific questions at any point. I can always take those. I think this will probably take 20 to 30 minutes, the slides, and then we have lots of time. Or if there's questions along the way, people can interrupt us.
Perfect.
So related to, this will be a little heavy on design and composition initially, but really I like to think of it as, are you unified, and do all the pieces that you've left on the stage fit together? Do you follow your own rules? It's going to be something that I want the designers and band directors to take away, and then maybe it's a different perspective for the judges to apply as they go through their approach to judging. Things that we want to look for is I always think of it somewhat as magic that happens on the field, and it took a lot of design and a lot of planning to make something occur, and that you as a designer need to be thinking about that, and then we want judges to speak to it and be able to understand. This third bullet, it's interesting to me that if you choose, which this year will be an interesting choice to make, to never hide people, never have a real transition, always have people on stage, you know, that to me gets a lot of credit if you do it well. And then, or if you've been really smart this year on small groups and they're out and how they're integrated together is going to be an interesting design choice for folks to work on. But I wanted to at least highlight unity and what that focus is as we go into understanding composition. Wanted to make sure that judges understood an element of what they should speak to, but also designers, you can look and say, did you meet and match these items that we're looking for? A total connection, a total plan, an overarching orchestration. Often it's on the score sheet, but really this is what composition means, is looking at the plan across time and how do the pieces relate to each other? Do they all have a point that relates to the totality of what you're putting together? And then I heard the end of David again talking about precision versus demand versus, you know, overall achievement. And we want to be able to differentiate that and say a group could be not clean, but maybe achieve more. Although there's an element in the ensemble visual aspect that needs to point at precision as well. I think it's important to remember environment and the simultaneous challenges that the performers are being asked to achieve. So we want judges to know really what was that level of achievement and how it compares to other groups. This item is, again, speak to what you know from a judge's perspective, but I think we talked a couple weeks ago that designers need to have a unique point of view and what's going to make you stand out. And so the more you can follow that from a design standpoint, the better it's going to be for the judges to see. We do want judges to speak in their own language and relate it to the score sheet. And then my emphasis for judges is really to dig in and try to figure out what the designer's trying to do and what the band's unique approach is. And then relate that band's choices to itself, because you can usually see what they're trying to do and then you can tell them when they get off track. And to me, that's the key aspect of this. This score sheet to me is more in that place than it is about pure excellence or pure design. It should be related to the totality of the show. What's the concept? How did it fit together? So I think you can use words that may be on the other score sheets, on the GE sheet, as long as you relate it back into what's going on from the sheet that you're actually judging. And I think it's important to speak to what did it take to train and what skills are being demonstrated from the performers to actually achieve that show. I do want judges to look at and speak to different elements and aspects of the musical voices, speak to the guard and percussion. I think I heard a couple weeks ago you might be piloting some things that give guards and percussion certain points or an emphasis or an impact on the score. I think, again, they have to fit into the totality. They can't just be off on their own. And so it's important to relate everything together, which gets back to the unity question. Also, the second bullet here is really for judges to look for ways to give points and not spend too much time in areas that maybe the team isn't getting points or has opportunities to grow. So you could certainly mention those, but I think you need to relate it to the score sheet and say, if you did this, then you could get more points. But then just leave it alone. You know, if a section's having problems or there's some weakness in the design, you can say it, but it also becomes a propensity or a area for a judge to get caught up in being negative, you know, caught in that space. You have to shake yourself out of that and move on. And again, relate those items to the overall intention of the show. Once the basics are in place, I think we really want judges to be able to look for the quality of the total, which I think we talked some for this coming year. The total may be very different in terms of the choices that are made. What if there's a show without movement, you know, like the second you do your opener and then you stand still and then you do a closer. I think we have to be ready for looking at a smart choice that reward achievement and reward those design choices this year related to the complexity. And I think some years we're looking for those who has more and who has more quality within a neighborhood, but I think you have to be really smart and look for achievement. And so judges need to emphasize that as they go through this season, especially. And again, to me, that goes back to the choices an instructor has made, the design team has made, and rewarding them for the choices they made, and then comparing them to others. Maybe then there's an opportunity to encourage them to move further into exploring details and nuance and creativity to a transition that might help them get more points over time.
Wow.
I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the designer side, which I would also want the judges to speak to, which we spent some time last session on really considering what your approach is, what's your intention. And I think you've got to be clear on that, who you are, what you're about. And then I want judges to speak to that. And they could be wrong, but at least they need to see that there's an intention. I often say that I want to be able to tell you had an intention, even if I don't understand what it was. And then we could maybe have a different conversation about what it is you're actually trying to do. Depending on your classes and classification and this part of the scoring scale, I think we have to make sure to speak to the units based on where they are and what you see their intention is. And then you want to speak to, again, I like to find what the point of view of the group is. If they're, let's say it's a smaller group and they're just able to come out and achieve, then you want to be able to speak to that and not ask them to do more things. And that you just want to go at it from what they set out to try to achieve. And then speak to where the team has the opportunity to follow its own rules and make that choice relate to their own choices. What do they have from their colors? What do they have from the part of the field that they're using, and help them without asking them to do something that's radically different than they may have the capabilities to achieve. I think some of you might have seen a picture that was included last time, but I wanted to walk through looking at, in my mind, of how the totality of a design comes through, that there are levels of completeness, and you can make it logical and correct. And if you have no flaws, then what do you ask for next from a performance, or what do you look for? And that these components come together that start to differentiate teams as you notice a neighborhood, perhaps. And you say you've got 3 bands that are equal and they're, you can't really find a flaw, then what do you start looking for, and what do you maybe talk about? And I think this is a good way for designers to look at and build a universe. I often talk to the groups as, what's your universe? If you set out to have a river in your show and then you march all over the river, I don't understand it. I think from a compositional standpoint, I go, do you follow your rules, or it's only when it's convenient for you? Or why do you go to a block form when you're about being planets or something? You know, so it's just a way that you can be unique and be different as you go through time. Then we do have this element of depth and range, and who might have more and who shows off more musical interpretation that starts to differentiate and adds to teams. Who can show more complexity over time. And maybe it's about the thought process. We talked about aesthetic, intellectual, and emotional effects, and that relates to design as well, is that the composition can speak to any of those aspects. Any choice that's made on the field should be able to be spoken of in the compositional space. And then I think we're really looking for, I always like to say, who's memorable, who's inventive and unique, and that can happen at any level. It doesn't mean it has to be exceptional or something we've never seen before. It just needs to be something that's unique to you. And then the value to me for judges would be, as you start to layer these components on, then you can get a higher score. And of course, who has unity? Some people might explore all these different levels of triangles, but they wouldn't have a unified idea in their show. And then that still would have a problem and wouldn't really be able to get as high of a score.
William, can I get into?
Do you know?
Yeah.
I know. I know.
Now you covered this briefly, but you know, a lot of us do multiple captions and all those kind of good things. So how do you, when you're judging an ensemble, and you see something and you know you're pretty much going into the effect mode? I mean, how do you kind of change your mentality there to stay specific in your caption? I mean, this is happening worldwide, you know that, but.
Yeah. I think, well, I guess, so I'll answer that two ways. One, you know, if a composition is done really well, it's probably really effective. And so for us judging, what I would ask is, we're humans too, and it should be okay to react. Now, the key would be, as you can react, and then you need to bring it back to, that was really excellent. I couldn't believe how you put it together and built into it. Tie it back to the caption, because you can't just be in the emotion land. And actually for composition, you shouldn't be in the emotional side of the reaction. I think you can give credit for the emotional training and aspects that the performers have been asked to achieve. But I think it's hard, and I agree that it happens to all of us. And sometimes you get to the ends of those kinds of shows and you have to take a moment. I've had to stop and go, maybe it was the most perfect thing I had seen in a while, or it really was emotional. And then I have to go, my score sheet says, even though you were really emotional and you made me cry, I have to say your composition falls here, you know, and then you have to kind of take a moment back. And I think anytime you get yourself caught, what I'd rather hear people do is, it's okay to go out of caption as long as you say it, and then maybe come back, you know, and say, okay, this relates to my caption in this way.
Excellent, thank you.
Does that work?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, but I do think that we shouldn't be, you know, if robots could do it, we would have robots doing it. And hopefully designers will forgive a judge for being human and responding, as long as they can pull it back to the sheet. And sometimes that happens on the field too, where I think you get a little more credit, or you can give more credit on the field when the emotions and the group is really energized. They should get some points there for training and for especially in the excellence side. So I think you have to just be knowing where your response is coming from and put it in the right place. After, the next question I like to ask is, if we had critique with any group, I always ask them first, what did you want me to take away from your show? Or what did you want me to, you know, if I was on GE, it'd be, what did you want me to feel? But everyone else is, what do you want me to notice? What's unique about you? And so I think judges need to try to answer that question, but also the designers need to answer that question in terms of what makes your show memorable. And the judges need to acknowledge what makes the show valuable. And then in the end, we've talked a lot about, I think the only sheet that maybe I'd feel more comfortable with a quantity conversation on the field, even though I'd want people to look a little more holistically at what was the context of what they were asked to achieve, because especially within a neighborhood, you're probably with the same quantity of stuff. And so then you have to start differentiating it a little bit more. And for composition, especially, who was more who they set out to be is a question I often ask. Who achieved more as to what they tried. And I think it's an interesting one for the field also, is to consider, you know, do they know who they are all the time? Are they who they are during a transition? Are they who they are while they're moving a prop? You know, because you notice those differences in teams who have information and are a part of creating a whole. And when I talk about a whole, is somewhat design, but it's also, do they know what's happening on the field at that moment? Do they know the feature is the soloist with the flag up on the left? And everyone understands that's the point. You can see that both from a design composition standpoint, you can see it on the field too, if they're really been trained and they have that information. So I think those are key things for us to talk about. It gets us out of just some of the simpler things, or it starts to differentiate folks around what specifically training and who has more things and stuff going on, and what's going on in their head, what do they have to concentrate on. Those are elements that I want people to think about. And, you know, for designers, if you've put in the effort around what is it going to take to do your show, and for judges to be able to see what that is, I think then we have a more relevant conversation and we start to give credit in those places that we need to. And then there could be an element where, and this may be this year's focus more so than not, there will be creative shows and inventive shows based on the situation. We may be in the mode of where we're differentiating based on achievement more so this year than maybe in the past, even though I might argue achievement's always the end all and the answer. But make sure that if a performance is the best one you've seen of that day, then those performers need to get that credit in their caption and maybe in the overall caption. And I don't know, Juno, do you spend time with the judges on profiling and subcaption ranking and the different, that it's okay if excellence is over a composition and actually they should be less related to each other? Or what's the philosophy there?
Yes, that's what we preach. I mean, we do numbers management things like pretty much every year, and how it relates to the spreads, and yeah, it's okay to have the kids over the show, and yes, it's okay to have the show over the kids as long as it's justified. But put each group strength and show their strengths, whatever it may be. Some may be trying to win the how caption.
Yeah.
Right.
You got to be aware of that. Most want to win the what caption, obviously, but there are groups out there that strive just to win that how caption, and we should reward those appropriately.
It's
And
also, I would say it's also important to speak to in a critique setting, to speak to the justification of why that happens, and the education for the staff who come in as to why you might reverse those captions. Sometimes they, in the old system, you might think that, oh, we peaked. Our kids are better than our show. It doesn't always mean that anymore. So, having the conversations with staffs in a critique setting is important. Being able to communicate why that happens from time to time.
Yeah, that's great, Blair. I think designers' egos have to let go a little bit of, isn't it a hope that you want I always would answer it, you want as many points, do you want me to take 4/10 away from your team, or do you want me to give them to you? So that if your ego's in the way of you not winning, okay, but that's not the philosophy. So I think it's a good conversation for critique. Why did you do it? What does it mean? And then it can change, because it should be about what happened that day, right? So that evolution can move along. A little bit on the ensemble excellence side of the score sheet in terms of what the judges should be talking about, but I think it's also an area of what the designers can be looking for. This gets to range and variety. It also gets to training, and as we've talked about music, I think you have to be able to hear and know what the music is in order to give it credit. I don't think the visual judges can be, or at least should be, ever just in the pure mode of, you did the most skills I ever saw and you get all the points, when I couldn't hear the music at all. So I think there has to be an element of what is the dynamic range speaking to. I can see your training level of the style that you put across, but then how does it really relate to, and how does it get more value, is when it's understood and when it applies to what's going on from the musical choices as well. We talked a little bit about simultaneous challenges, which relates to music. And then this second bullet, to me, is a key place that I'd like to talk about in both the ensemble and then especially on the field, is looking for the performer's ability to respond to whatever's actually happening in that day. Because things will happen, listening environments might be different, weather environments might be different. What skills have they been given to actually achieve in that moment? And again, do they have an understanding across the entire field? And I think that's really important for us to talk about and acknowledge. A few more things there. And the last part, Dave and I have talked a lot about, is I think, especially in ensemble, but it's an achievement on the field, is really to acknowledge smart choices which match the level of achievement. And I think, Juno, it's probably a question I'd have, is because I heard that last question for Dave about demand, is, philosophically, do you all want a more pure look at vocabulary or composition versus smart choices and success?
Success.
Yeah. So So I think that's important to see and look, and I would answer it similarly to what Dave had said earlier in his session around, you know what's going on as a design team and a band director in rehearsal. Are you seeing that match and that same level of achievement? Often that's a really good conversation and critique as well for judges to say. I usually flip it around, especially if a team has not finished where they think they might have wanted to finish. And I will say, how did you think you did? And what did I miss? And then usually what comes back is, well, they weren't the best. Okay, so then we have something else to talk about. Or the judges, to me, are always just a mirror of what's happening today. And maybe it wasn't about your team, but it was about the 3 other teams that just did better that day. And so I think it's important to always come back to, did I see compatibility? Did I see that success factor that we want to make sure judges are talking about and designers are being open to? Spending a little time on the field focus. Again, I think what's interesting is sometimes we talk about choreographic choice, or why are you doing the, often if you think, we talk about it, band body, why are you doing the move that you taught the kids to do? And does it serve the purpose of your concept and your show, or is it just choreography? And is it just vocabulary? So I think that's something to think about. There are basic training elements you could pick, but then what is the dynamics? What is the artistic role? What is the choreography you might do that makes you look more unique and maybe only you can do? And so how does that fit into the concept? And then I think the field people can notice that we will all talk about a basic training and the range of skills, but then we'll start to notice things that are more different, and you get credit upstairs and downstairs for that. I do think stamina and the skills overall to, again, achieve and listen across the field are important. And just remembering as you build your training program how it relates to the totality of what you're trying to do. Often we'll see teams that might have a strength in one area, or, is it okay that you might come out and, again, maybe you only know how to do 3 body moves and you do them over and over. Okay, well, you're probably going to be really good at them, and that's where you're going to get your excellence points. You don't have to choose to spin all pieces of equipment. You don't have to dance or march all the time. I think the key is to be smart and put some variety out there. And triad or all 3 all the time is something that's kind of old school, and maybe we don't ever see that much anymore. So it's really about the totality of what we're asking to teams to put together. And again, design ingredients, but they don't mean anything unless they create something that's a total experience from the teams. Here's just some elements from a design standpoint to think about, but also for judges, it's an easy way to talk about things that might be happening. And they could be easy things. Often I find myself in critique telling people, you don't have to change anything you've written, you just have to change how you're doing it. And so you could get variety from the way you do it. You could repeat the same technical skill 5 times, but every one of those can have a different speed, a different dynamic quality. Something could happen with the body shape that could help you get credit and add more range as you go through the show. And I think for judges is to look at what's easier to recognize and give and see compared to maybe what's harder to see. So if you can see an expressive dynamic change, it's harder to get that to communicate. So I think it's important to notice when those things happen and make sure that you're giving credit in those places. And then from composition, for sure, I think I often relate it on the field that you can see when parts relate to each other. And I didn't put it in the slide specifically, but to think about, again, its relationship to each other, interrelationship, and do the pieces and parts go together. But then from a compositional standpoint and on the field is interdependence. Are there parts that cannot be done without another person? And whether it's musically that is the way it is versus to the bodies, or there are certain skills, it could be tricks and equipment, or there could be some dance things. But starting to see that differentiation between they're related to each other, but you could take them away and it wouldn't change what the other person did, or they're interrelated, and if you removed one, then you would have a radical change. Would be something to think about. I did want folks to really consider scale and how far away judges are and the audience, because some of those things we can see and some of those things we can't. And then really reminding folks some things we talked about a couple weeks ago. To me, these are the elements that make the vision happen. And also there is a formula to me, which is about those smart choices and smart achievement and being unique and memorable, because you want us all to watch, you want your kids to come back. And so I think those are the keys that we want to make sure and talk about, both from a judge standpoint and when you do your design. Then with that, Juno, we can open it for questions or conversation.
Okay, so yeah, I see one. William, a question. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, how do you, or what are some different ways you address the popular scatter and run repeat idea? Seems that many are going to this format of transition between sections, but get repetitive on how they go about it from an ensemble as well as from the field perspective.
Yeah, and I think this again goes to how, let's talk from ensemble first, is how does that choice fit into the whole that the team has tried to do? And so usually it might be okay to do it once, and then if you see it as every time, then it's a little more, in my view, it would get less credit, and you would question it in terms of what are ways you could make that different, have more intention, have more uniqueness to make it stand out inside the concept that you've chosen in your show. And teams that spend time crafting that, and I use that word, craft, that then they need to get more credit. And that's an opportunity for you to tell that team they can get more credit if they had a real intention during that time. From a field standpoint, usually I take that as you can see them up close. Do they know what their role is? Do they know what their purpose is during that moment? And that's the way to get credit. If they're just running around and bumping into each other and kind of laughing, then you know the whole moment hasn't really been taught or hasn't been planned. And so usually I think those moments turn into questions and saying, I think there's an opportunity, you could get more points here if right now what I see is no adding to the range from the field, or the similar kind of transition from upstairs where you would wonder, how does it add value? And that would be the way to ask the designers.
Okay, and then I'll piggyback off of that, William. Now, how about the people that are like doing voiceovers and things of that nature? I mean, is there something on the field or even ensemble, I guess, that we should be aware of while those type of things are going on? Or is that just a transitional idea from point A to point B?
And so it depends on what's happening. I guess I'll talk at it maybe one way, Juno, and then we can keep talking. Okay. I think it's interesting from a compositional standpoint, or from, when and why are the voiceovers, what's happening during the voiceovers, and is it the clear intention? The voiceovers themselves don't start off with a certain value or a certain thought. But there could be a show that maybe you need the voiceovers to make it work. Is that a problem? I think if it works, then it's okay. I think that, again, I would look at what's happening during that time, and is there a total plan for that? Usually we can tell, did it fit? So I think it's a unity question. And then the field view, again, is always, do the performers have the information they need to make a moment really come across?
I mean, sometimes in those situations, William, would you agree that they'll have to almost, in certain instances, train specific kids to a specific thing that might be different than what someone else is doing at the same time?
Yeah, I think that.
So the value should go up.
Right, then their value should go up. I think that it's interesting. I would often tell folks that there are ways and tricks. You can teach the groups 2 or 3 specific skills, and then you say, we're going to randomize that or alternate that and throw those skills in, and you kind of mask what's going on. But it took a moment of actually crafting it and putting it together. That I think is important to see that variety. You get more range then, more skills. So I think that's important. It did make me think of also though that field judges and ensemble, that groups that pay attention to every section and every place on the field have that opportunity to get more points. That we often see, what is the front ensemble doing? Does the front ensemble in the costume? Does the front ensemble act in the character? Do they have choreography? So I think judges need to be open to everyone on the field having a possibility of a role and contribution. And I think that's the place to look and say, oh, well, maybe that section, we don't know if a section couldn't handle it, but we could certainly ask and say, okay, I see almost everyone's part of this, but I don't understand why this one section's not. And then it just becomes an opportunity that could happen.
Kind of playing off that a little bit, could you speak a little bit from the judge's perspective on the importance of sampling, and particularly from a field perspective? Little bit easier to sample and from an ensemble perspective, but from the field, the importance of that balance of the entire section, especially those who do properly use variety in the field.
Yeah, I think it's really critical to balance your commentary and make a point of going to every section, and that would be every musical voice as well. And to specifically try to know that you've talked to or looked for every section. Do your field people go out and around, or do they stay on the front?
Out and around.
Okay, so and I think it would apply regardless, but you need to try. I usually take a view that is percentage of the team. If you've got if there's 30 percussion and 15 winds and 2 guard, well, then your sampling might wind up being more percussion and then the winds and then the color guard, or vice versa, that field person for a team that has a super strong color guard, that you need to make sure and look and go, okay, there are 30 of those, 20 of those people compared to 80 in the winds. You need to not spend all your time on the guard, and they can lean into getting a few more points because of the skills the guard might be showing. But again, every visual caption should be sampling and speaking to the guard, speaking to the percussion. I think it's really helpful for the groups to hear that. Plus, it also changes your perspective and your approach. And sometimes you're going to find sections that are more skilled, and maybe there's opportunities for training. And just to see that kind of balanced approach. But again, like I said earlier, is find ways to give those points. If a section is having a problem, then you could say, hey, this isn't going very well and you're not going to get extra points here, but you're not taking points away either. So, but I think it is really helpful to balance that, and you want to try to make sure you've gone around and talked. And then on an ensemble standpoint is to make sure and do it too, that it gives you a chance to say, I haven't seen this section really featured or as an emphasis, but I'm going to sample them anyway, so that you can make sure to see where they can get points or not.
Yeah, it seems like the visual representation from the percussion in particular has really increased over the last 10, 15 years. A lot of that a carryover from the indoor activity, where you're seeing a lot more of that, simultaneous responsibility approach to the percussion section being displayed on the field, and just making sure that we're giving them equal consideration, or at least consideration weight based on their contribution.
Totally right. Yeah.
And William,
I think go ahead, Gino.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback that on what Blair was saying right there. Not just glossing over the percussion, if you know what I mean. Just kind of, on the field judge, just kind of glosses over, the bass drums are out of step, and that's about the input you get, or you know what I mean. Yeah. Is there any way to be more specific to that particular equipment, even that they're trying to manipulate? which is totally different than a trumpet or a flute.
So you're talking about bass drums?
Or yeah, any other instruments, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that, that's probably an interesting way to speak to the unique challenges of every group or every instrument and every section. And I think that's valid for each of us to dig into that and say, you understand that weight challenge, here's the training that needs to occur. Or then also I would flip it and say, look for ways, and say the snares really understand, or whatever it is, the tenors are into it. So I know I'd often say we wouldn't necessarily put it on the files, but the students are the students, and they just don't have the training if they're not able to show it to you. But I think then flipping that around is to, you'd want to make that comment, but then not go back to it probably, and look for ways that, we don't want to sample just to sample to not find points either. If they're not the feature and they're not really doing anything, then okay. So I think that we have to make sure to look for, you're featuring certain sections and you want to make sure we get those credits. But then if I go, I'm seeing the same 8 people the whole show, then balance that compared to the next team that you see 30 people do those same kinds of things or see more, so that you're always comparing. That's the judge's job, is to compare and look, and then let the ensemble judge look and say, you were smart, you featured people, they were in the right spot, and the people who were new didn't have to do as much. Maybe let the system do its job as you look on the field. But I always like to think of that from a percentage standpoint of, who did I see do the skills? It's like having a soloist. The soloist can only get so many points compared to the whole group.
Now, William, going back to ensemble, because it's always changed over the years. Are you taking in the whole entire field most of the time? Some of the time? I mean, do you kind of go in and out, in and out?
Yeah, I think definitely it's a zoom in, zoom out aspect, that and that's another one, that the entire field, if you can see the entire field, which usually we can,
Right.
Then the entire field is important, depending on what a team has chosen to do, which would restrict the space. Or, it's always a little bit odd for me, but then the judges get used to it, is, we're on a football field with sometimes the logos and other things are really kind of weird, but I'm always amazed that we wind up ignoring them or not seeing them. But I think zooming into specific choreography and details and sections is really critical in the ensemble commentary, and then coming back out and how does it relate to the whole. I think that's the key, is being able to see complexity and details, and then relate it to the total that's going on, and then really looking at how the crafting is put in place to move us around the field and to connect those ideas together. Those become the key differentiators often with groups, is who were you during your development to the next idea? Did you make that interesting and creative, which goes to the earlier question about scatter and run versus 3 times versus did you actually craft it? And I think that would be an interesting element for this year, if we get caught without as much time to put the shows together, we could still comment on that kind of, okay, I get it, you had to just run to the next production. But what is it? It's not that we're going to be hard on people, but it becomes an interesting if everybody's doing the same thing.
And just to clarify, we do not take points away.
Correct. That is right. It's a build-up system.
Could you say that again? Yeah.
There's no penalties and there's no points get taken away ever.
Yeah, the one thing
I think, and you could decide, Juno, that I think probably it would come out in a critique for sure. But sometimes on my files, I might go, well, you stopped getting points right here, and be able to tell people that, you're not getting points for this part, or often you see it in a show that the latter part or something doesn't work. It's not finished. Somehow it doesn't go together yet because it's not done. And then often the recap would be, first 2/3 up till the start of this portion of the show. That's where you're getting all your points today. and then there weren't any added. And I think it's okay to tell people that's what's going on. And, you know, and that's what goes to this follow your own rules. And you had a cohesive idea that it all worked and then it stopped working. So, you know, depending on how pure you're going to be, but I think it's important for teams to hear that. And then, like, if we are talking to a section that's having struggles, I usually wouldn't say you're not getting points for it, but I think it's probably pretty clear that you're not taking points away. Or at least we want judges to make sure and know that. No more ticks.
No more ticks. I hear you. Now, Will, you said that, you know, try not to get too tied up, you know, into the affecting, but you do want the and this is from, I guess, ensemble or field, you want the performers to be what the show is about. Was that correct, even on these captions?
I think, well, a key to me in ensemble, to me, the performers have to understand, you know, what's the unique style of and character, artistic roles in the ensemble sheet, not necessarily emotion.
Mm-hmm.
It's not emotional effectiveness, that's only in one place. But I think understanding who they are, their unique style, how they march, how they present themselves, what's the character they're trying to be, do they all understand the character the same way? You know, and sometimes it could be where you're going, you know, some of them are smiling and some are not. I don't understand. You know, that's an excellence comment, right?
Mm-hmm.
That, like, and that could come on the field too. I think it is about the complexity of, do they know who they are? Do they understand what they've been asked to achieve? Do they understand what this moment is about? You know, what are they trying to do in this moment? They're playing this phrase and they're supposed to stand this way and relate to each other in what way? I think it comes out in all the component pieces that they've been asked to achieve or in both of these score sheets. It's just the emotional effectiveness is not. But
Gotcha.
Do they consistently understand what that emotion does to their body? Well, that's probably going to drive excellence issues. And so until they get that achievement level to be more consistent and they know how to channel that energy, they're going to not be the same. And I think, like we talked, is being clear on what it is you're rewarding and what it is you're seeing and saying versus you're seeing something, so say it. And the key is, I'd rather have the conversation and critique later about, hey, I think you blurred into GE, and then the judge can explain and go, no, your performers don't understand. They were overamped today and it drove all these errors. You know, so I should be able to talk about that versus when they can understand it and channel it, then I should be able to see that common understanding. And it's going to get points in every caption then, as soon as the achievement happens.
Okay, so now with this unique situation that we're coming up in 2020 possibly, it's going to be okay for people to just get to their spot and stand and play and not have a visual judge ask them for more responsibility in that moment or those moments.
Yeah.
Are we kind of agreeing to that, William?
Well, I would say yes, I think. And then the comment should be, you know, I understand the choice. And now let's talk about, do they all understand standing here and being the same and being consistent? There's other things you could talk about.
Yes, exactly.
But I think it's important to acknowledge and say, here's the choice, and we may see a lot more of it. I think the interesting balance is going to be, and I heard Dave talk about it, and I think philosophically this should play itself out this year. That choice and that achievement level may beat a group that's trying to do more, less well.
Yes, I think, William, actually, that's one of the questions here, and it's, let me get to it. You know, given how different this fall is likely to be, MCBA considering adjusting the sheets so we'd be able to provide credit for simplicity and quality versus quantity and etc. So I think that's the way we're kind of gearing ourselves.
I'd probably say you don't need to change the sheets. I get there's an emphasis maybe that the philosophy of the judges could be shifted. I might argue the philosophy doesn't need to change, but I mean, because we should be rewarding that anyway, that looking for achievement, looking for smart choices, looking for compatibility should be the point of view. Now, we may say in a compositional side and in a repertoire side this year, we're understanding more of what these choices might mean. And then we're going to lean into achievement and smart choices.
Right. Yeah, I definitely like that.
And then I think within the, and then it may be, and that's something we'd have to face for the judges, is if more teams wind up looking more similar from a visual standpoint, how do you differentiate groups who might not have a lot of differentiation? And so I think that's why.
Do they call that judging?
Yeah, judging, that's why the judges are there. But going back to looking at who had, and there will be some variations, but who had more of what given a similar range, and that's what I hope for the pyramid and the other elements, and you use the score sheets, is to say within a neighborhood of similar groups, how do you choose? And then it could be about musical complexity and simultaneous challenges, and who had a clearer concept overall and who had a better identity, and whatever the understanding is going to be. That's where I think the judges need to be looking and being more clear, and making sure that they talk about, they won't always know because they haven't seen all the groups, but just to be able to say, looking at you and what you chose to do, here's where you are. And then I think it goes right back to the profiling, Juno, in the earlier conversation, is we may see more of that excellence score getting higher points the whole season. And so that just may be the way it's going to be. And then differentiators become who was better at excellence, even though there should still be a choice around composition or the content on the field.
Yeah, and MCBA has addressed some of the concerns about how much, because with the adjustment to the times, the minimum show lengths, and Chuck can speak more to this, but there are some conversations about making it a little bit easier on the bands, which in turn will give ensembles the opportunity maybe to develop typically like normally in a show, but not have the constraints of such a long production.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a rule change that was voted on and approved that we're going to allow shows that are 5 minutes long. That's what the minimum is for this fall. So we've already addressed that.
And so then within that, I would guess we'd see there would be some teams who will be creative with their use of their backyards and small groups and other things that may do a lot in 5 minutes. I don't know. So it'll be interesting. So it'll be the same approach, the same criteria applied to a different length of time. Same constraints. Everybody has the same constraints. So now what? And I would just say that given what we talked about 2 weeks ago, and the emphasis today is really consider your own unique environment, your own unique strengths, and feature those. What my hope for from the season is that even more than we've seen before is we see really unique bands and unique interpretations.
Yes.
And things that we've never seen in that sense before. That to me, marching band as we knew it is done. And now it's going to be forever changed. So what does that mean for 5 minutes, for different use of the field, for you don't have time to, I don't know what it is, but I think it's something we've not seen. And to me, I'd like to see that uniqueness, creativity, make it really hard for the judges to pick because everybody was so great and so different. And then we see what the system says.
Yeah, I mean, some of the design guys that I talk with, or some of the drill writers, or whatever you'd like to call them, or the choreographers, I mean, they're pretty excited about this because it's going to take them in a different direction, which is only going to help with their growth overall. Basically, that's what happens when you go into a new direction. And it could be a positive for sure. Yeah. So if any of the band directors are out there listening, I would recommend that you don't try to do a 7, 8, 9 minute show. There's no requirement for that anymore. Yeah. So don't even think about that. And you might be worried about some budget concerns. So, maybe you have to use a costume from last year for the guard or 5 years ago, go into your flag closet and see how many flags you might have that might work with your new show. You know, all those type of things to try to, you know, not have to worry about those things this year, just for 2020, obviously. You know, like William said and David said earlier, you know, just smart choices will definitely pay big rewards, I think.
Well, I'm going to jump in as well and say that we did make a rule change at Rules Congress this year to have show lengths be 6 minutes and less, or 6 to 10 minutes. That's the general trend in the whole activity. So the official rule is 6 to 10, and we've changed it for 2020 to be 5 to 10. And you know, when I was a band director, I always wanted to be on the short end of that. It's less show to clean, and then you can make what you have better. So can I preach that anymore?
Exactly right. No pre-shows either.
Yeah, I got away from that too. Yeah.
No extra rehearsed things to practice. Yeah.
That's exactly it right there. You don't have to waste time in the extra 2 minutes that you thought you needed, that you really probably didn't need from the adjudicator's point of view.
All right, well, we're really close to the end of our time here. I'll just open it up for any of you to give last comments on this, and then when you guys are done, we'll wrap it up. So anybody have anything to say?
I'll just say it's awesome that MCBA decided to go down to 5 minutes. Fantastic for the organization.
I just want to say thank you to William for taking the time out of his day and 2 weeks ago to take part in this. Him and Dave, they've been incredible and very informative clinics, and we thank you.
And you'll be sending us those slides, right, William?
We have them already.
Oh, you have them already? Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I agree. I'm so impressed with your association and the focus you're taking on it. That is really going to set you up well. You're ahead of a lot of places, and I think the educational side and getting people to shift their focus is really going to pay off.
Great. All right. Well, thanks everyone for
Thank you so much, William.
joining us today, and thanks to William for making this happen. And everybody, enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Yep.
Take care,
Bye
everyone.
now.